Hello and welcome to Shift Change. Today in Shift Change, we are going to be talking about sewing machines, specifically antique and vintage sewing machines. And whatever we say is opinion. You can do what you want. Spend your money how you want to spend your money. I'm not your parent or guardian. Are you their parent or guardian?
No, we have a baby.
We have enough. So do whatever you want to do, but these are our opinions. Let's jump into it. Okay, so do you use a vintage sewing machine? What was your first project like?
So I don't use a vintage or antique sewing machine, and if you have seen any of our other videos, then you'll know that I don't. I use a modern machine. If you haven't seen our videos, go check them out.
Here's a playlist here, or maybe it's here. It's up there. It's up there.
Anyway, my first project, the way that I got into sewing is I really wanted to go to a Renaissance festival with a group of friends. So I put together my costume for that, my outfit for that. And I didn't know how to use a sewing machine. And as you all know, I do not like to hand sew. And if you didn't know, now you know I don't like to hand sew. So I decided to put it together the way that a outfit should be put together, through the way that you would put together a typical pattern. But instead of sewing everything, I hot glued everything together.
That does keep the fabric together.
It does. And nobody was able to tell. If you looked at the outfit that I was wearing, you wouldn't be able to tell that it was completely hot glued together. It wasn't until later in the day, after we'd been outside in the heat for a while, that the hot glue started to remelt and my outfit started to fall apart. But the pictures looked great. So
basically you started from the bottom, now you're slightly above the bottom.
Yes. So no longer bottom feeder, little bit higher than that. But I was actually gifted my first sewing machine. It was a Brother modern sewing machine, by a director that I worked with, and she found out that I hot glued all of my outfits together.
But you made the pattern.
Yeah, so she was like, you need to teach yourself how to sew. So I taught myself how to sew on a modern machine.
My next question is, if I am absolutely brand new to sewing, I've never sewed a day in my life, do you think that I should get an antique machine? We'll talk about antique machines first.
No, I personally don't think that's a good idea, simply because antique machines come with their whole kit and caboodle of things that make them different from modern machines.
Like what?
Needing to know the different parts, needing to know if certain things are oiled correctly, and if it's got all the pieces.
Well, it's an antique machine too, so it might be difficult to find those parts. Or if you find them in reproduction, they might be very expensive to find. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So going into a brand new hobby that you're not even sure you really like, I wouldn't recommend jumping in headfirst into trying to restore or find an antique machine that may or may not have all the pieces to it.
Do you think that someone who is absolutely new to sewing, has never sewed before, should possibly get a vintage machine?
So vintage machines are a little bit more accessible, but can also be pricey. So it kind of depends on if you find the thing that works for you. Obviously, if you've got grandma's machine, she's been using that machine forever, and she's willing to just give it to you because she doesn't use it anymore, then yeah, you can learn on a vintage machine.
You take that free machine.
Absolutely. But if you're trying to find something that is vintage in a specific era for something, that could be more difficult to find.
Well, I imagine it's a lot like getting a used car. You kind of have to look at that exact model for that exact year to see if there were any duds, if this is a lemon, if it's an actual good machine, because it's great to find one in working order, but if it was known for being a lemon and it only works for a year,
Exactly.
It's not going to be very useful.
Now, It also depends on who you are as a person, the lifestyle that you live. Personally, I need a really light sewing machine. I need something that I can move around very quickly, very easily, because we have the baby. And so I need to put it away.
Well, we've also moved a bunch.
Yes.
In the last 5 years, we've moved 6 times. And vintage machines typically aren't that heavy. You do want to protect them, so you might need to invest in a carrying case if they don't have that. But antique machines can be quite heavy and difficult to transport safely.
So while it's nice because they are weighted and stable to the ground, it isn't the most conducive unless you have a sewing space that you can leave set up and don't really have to move it around a whole bunch.
What advice would you give to a new sewist to get a new machine? What features would you want to look for?
So when you start out sewing, and even now, me included in this, you really only need a straight stitch, a zigzag stitch, and a buttonhole stitch. Anything more than that, you don't really need. If it has a bunch of other settings, that's awesome, but they're not necessary for most projects. It can make it more convenient, but again, it's not super necessary. I wouldn't say to spend a ton of money. Invest a little bit. I mean, this is something that you want to do, that you are looking at picking up as a hobby, but I wouldn't spend over
$150, $250?
Yeah.
Okay.
How about you? Because you typically just hand sew. So if you were looking for a machine, what's something that would be on your mind in terms of finding a machine for you?
You might not know this, but Dionysus actually uses my machine. I got it because I used to do quite a bit of sewing and pattern making, and then I got lazy. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I was looking for a machine that was very lightweight, that came with its own protective case. I didn't want to spend a lot of money, especially because I was transitioning from solely hand sewing to using a sewing machine, so I didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. And I wanted something that pretty much just did the basics. I wanted a couple of different types of straight stitches. I wanted a couple zigzags. I didn't even know it had a buttonhole until my mom told me. She was like, "This is a nice machine. It has a buttonhole." I was like, "Yeah, it's got a buttonhole maker." Where can you point that feature out? And then can you show me how it works?
On your machine?
On this machine I just bought. But I was looking for something pretty simple to use. And at the time, I was still moving around a lot. I was performing a whole bunch, and I was moving from place to place to place. And I didn't want to have to drag a machine that was as big as me. I do like antique machines for their aesthetic, though.
Oh, they're very pretty. And I think that if you are the type of person who has been hand sewing for a very, very long time, you know that this is a hobby that you really like, then yeah, I could see you getting an antique sewing machine. And if you decide that you hate using it, you still appreciate the machine, and it would still fit with the aesthetic and your style of your house or your living space. So that would be something that I would suggest to you if you know that you like this hobby, if this is something that you have been doing for years and you're trying to just up your game a little bit.
Would you also suggest that if you're looking for maybe not something quite as old, like a vintage machine, you're dedicated already to this hobby, would you suggest also looking at a vintage machine?
I think that would be a situation where you would look into a vintage machine. Yes.
I'm not editing that out.
It's fine.
It's fine. It's fine.
But yes, I would then look into a vintage machine. I think that also looking at reviews for any machine, for modern machines, antique machines, figuring out what is going to work best for you. So you typically handle all of the repairs for the machine because it's your machine. Do you have any tips or tricks or anything to keep in the back of your mind when getting a machine in regards to repairs?
Yeah, that was something I definitely looked into when I was looking for a machine. I am the type of person that likes to go drop off my machine and then pick up my machine. There are people that do repairs that will come to your home. There are people that you can send in your machine to, but I like having that control of if it gets broken in transport to or from, I did that. That's on me. So that was a big factor. And I actually went to go speak to this shop just to make sure that they were really comfortable with my machine because I knew it was a lower quality one. But it was a huge factor because it doesn't matter if you are spending $5 at an estate sale for a machine or $5,000. If you're spending money, you want to be able to maintain it and you want to get proper use out of it.
Yes.
I do want to say, if this is something you're dead set on, if you want an antique machine or you want a vintage machine, do it. We're strangers on the internet. You don't have to listen to us. You should, but you don't have to. Definitely go for it if this is something that you have your heart set to, because it's a great opportunity and it really is connection to history.
Absolutely. And if you end up hating it because it's different than modern machines, it doesn't work the same way. You have to learn how to use it. If it's a hand crank, if it's a foot pedal, if it's whatever the case may be, it's going to be different than a modern machine. It's going to take time to learn it. So if you end up hating that but still like sewing, maybe that just wasn't it, but you'll still have an appreciation for that machine, for that piece of history, and it's a beautiful art piece that can sit in the corner of your room and still get all the appreciation that it deserves.
I just imagined a beautiful like 80s bedroom with like an 80s sewing machine and just being so aesthetic. I don't know why. That made me, and it has like a little bedazzler next to it. I love that. These are just our opinions. I hope if you are looking into getting your first sewing machine or just joining this hobby, that this video helped you maybe come to your own decision.
Thank you for coming to court today. If you're new here, consider subscribing. If you're just passing through, we really appreciate you visiting. We recently launched a Ko-fi page, which is linked down in the description below. We are working on trying to get a dress form for myself and the baby so that we can up our aesthetic, costume, historical garments and make more beautiful things to show you guys. We appreciate you guys being here again, and we'll see you next time.